Hello, geometry students. So we'll continue our study of how to prove triangles are congruent. Remember, if we're proving polygons are congruent, any other shape, we would have to show every corresponding side's congruent and every corresponding angle's congruent. But I'm going to be showing you 4 shortcuts to prove triangles are congruent. We've already studied side, 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 and side, angle, side. So we know if we have 3 sides in one triangle congruent to 3 sides in another, that's one of our shortcuts to prove triangles are congruent. Or if we have side and an included angle and side being the same as the side, included angle and the side in another triangle, that is a second shortcut that if we just know that, we could also prove triangles are congruent. And here's a third way, ASA. If you know that 2 angles and the included side of one triangle are congruent to the 2 angles and the included side in the other triangle, that's another shortcut that allows you to say the triangles are congruent to each other. So pause and see if you can find the 2 triangles out of these 3 that can be proven congruent using ASA. Notice that in this triangle, the side is not included in between the 2 angles. So if we're going to use ASA, the side has to be included in between the 2 angles. So here we have angle, included side angle, the same as angle, included side angle over here. So these are my 2 triangles that can be proven congruent using ASA. So pause and practice on your own paper and then press play. Remember, we can be given information in 2 different places. We can be given a statement, which we aren't given in this particular example, or we can be given marks on the diagram, which we are given in this example. So the first thing we ask ourselves is, hey, what are we given? And we are given that these segments are congruent by the scratch marks, and we're also given that they're parallel because of the big fat arrows here. And so then we ask ourselves, well, what does the given information tell us? If we're given parallel lines, you definitely can be assured that you are going to use your properties of parallel lines. In this case, we're using parallel lines cut by a transversal. Alternate interior angles are going to be congruent. What else do we know? What else do we know? Well, we also see that the 2 triangles share side FK. And so we ask ourselves, is this enough to prove triangle congruency? We have a side, included angle, and a side over here. And in the other triangle, we have side, included angle, and side over here. And so yes, we can pull out SAS, side, angle, side, to prove the triangles are congruent. Pause and answer this and then press play. In this particular problem, we see that 2 sides are given and the third side is shared, and so we can prove these triangles are congruent by side, side, side. Pause and practice on your own paper and then press play. The first thing we have to ask ourselves is, hey, what are we given? We are given that these 2 angles are congruent, and we're given that these 2 sides are parallel. Be careful. Remember, this mark means parallel. It does not mean congruent. Then we ask ourselves, well, what does that given information tell us? If we're given parallel lines, we're probably going to use a property of parallel lines. In this case, we can use the property that states parallel lines cut by a transversal. Alternate interior angles are congruent. And then we can say, what else do we know? Well, we see that the 2 triangles share side QR, and so that side is congruent to itself. And so notice in these 2 triangles, we have the blue angle, the included side, and the pink angle in this triangle. And in the other triangle, we have the blue angle, the included side, and the pink angle in this triangle. And so we can ask, is this enough to prove triangle congruency? Yes, we can use our new way, ASA, to state that those triangles are congruent. So pause, practice on your own, and then press play for the solution. First, we have to ask ourselves, what are we given? Well, we're given measurements of the angles. We're given these two measurements of these two angles are 60, and we're given these two measurements of these two angles are 80. We're also given the measurements of those sides are the same. So then we ask ourselves, what does the given information tell us? And we can pull out our definition of what it means to be congruent, to state that those things are congruent. So because of our given information, measurements are the same, we now know, using our definition of congruency, that these parts are congruent. So then we ask ourselves, is this enough to prove congruency? And we see angle included side angle here are exactly congruent to the angle included side angle over here. And so we say, yes, by ASA, we can make a congruency statement. So now you know 3 shortcuts for proving triangles are congruent.